Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Modular DIY. Every now and again something captures your imagination and you just have to kind of go with it. Sort everything else, all the other mountains of paperwork and bits and pieces that I'm trying to achieve and trying to pull together. Like, sort all that, let's do this. What's this? This is the Patching Panda particles. It's, for some reason, it's got under my skin. I need to have it. I need to possess it. I need to put it together and make it work. I can't seem to help myself. So, you might have seen my article on this, and also it was in my Molten Monthly, where what it is, as far as we can work out, it's a 4-slider, 4-channel rhythm generator which uses patterns and probability and randomness in order to generate awesomeness within your rack. We like a little bit of awesomeness, and so I've been quite taken with it. And this is kind of without any clear idea of what it's really doing. But I have a sense. I have a sense that it's something which is going to give me an awful lot of joy. So I ordered it straight off Thonk as soon as it became available. Thank you, Thonk. Got it to me next day before 1, which is stunning. So I have an hour, 2 hours maybe, and perhaps time later to play with it. So I thought I'd give it a go. Having opened the build document, it says it's quite complicated. So, that's interesting. I was kind of hoping it might just be very, very, very straightforward. But hey, I'm up for a challenge. So what do we get? We get a piece of salmon. Looks like, not sure. I guess this must be the panel and stuff. Let's just be careful I'm not doing anything nasty. So there seems to be quite a bit of surface mount which is already done, which is nice. Oh, it's got lots of pokey bits on it. Okay, I think I might have got there. So it's looking like, oh, nice. Nice bit of artwork on the back there. Lovely. DIY it says. Patching Panda particles. And it's driven by an arm thing, and it's got a bit of an SD card in there for whatever it is that runs it. Good bit of surface mount that I'm not going to have to take care of. So that's good. So you can have jets overhead, just adding to the drama of what we're going through. Let's see what else we have in here. Power cable. So I've got quite a bit of front panel hardware shenanigans. A lot of switches, sockets, and of course those 4 LED sliders, which are not very long, has to be said. And then here's a couple of headers for whatever it is that goes on the back. Nice sticker. Ah. Ooh. Here we go. So that's the PCB we're going to be dealing with. You know, it doesn't look that hard. In fact, it mostly looks like this is all just front panel stuff. Interesting. So I should have this done in a jiffy. And this is the front panel. I've gone for the black rather than the silver. Good. So, any other information in here? Please refer to patchingpanda.com to assemble this module. Thanks for adopting a panda in your rack. Oh, what a nice little thing. Now, I did have a look on the website, and on the Patching Panda Particles page, there is no build document. Maybe that's something they can remedy. So I had to go back to Thonk, went to their page about the particles, and on there's a build document which links you back to the Patching Panda website where the build document actually is. But hey, we got there in the end. I'm not going to worry about that kind of thing. So, well, this is very interesting. I don't think I'm going to be doing anything to that. I'm just going to be plugging this on top. A bit like that, I imagine. Something like that. Easy peasy. Put that to one side, put the front panel to one side, put those there for the moment. Let's have a look at the hardware. So we've got in here the little display, I believe. One knob, two knobs. You've got those mute buttons, of course. Lots of sockets, bits and pieces, and then the 4 slidery things. That is all the components. Not a resistor, not a capacitor. None of the usual bits, just the front hardware. Interesting. So I'm going to speed solder through this thing. Right, so what does the complex grade? Oh, it's got a red dot. Oh, heck. It says, quite a complex build. Please read all out to be aware to make this assembly as easily as possible. What? Follow the steps carefully. If you make an error soldering the hardware, it'll be very hard to fix. Some components are tricky to align. Please double check. Okay, good advice. So number 1, prepare the parts. Number 2, attach the headers and solder. Place the jacks and sliders. Good, I like what I'm seeing. Step is crucial. Okay, on the mute switches. I'm going to look through. Straighten up the pot, coda legs, gentle white cap, segment display, do not solder, make sure everything can be pressed. Try not to rubber it to the panel. That's quite funny. I mean, Patching Panda, bless them, got in touch after I was talking about it and said, hey, you know, we would have sent you one. In fact, we reached out to you back in February to say, hey, would you like to do one of these? And apparently I completely ignored them, which is awful. I would never intentionally do that to anybody. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter whether a manufacturer or a normal person. I really, you know, honestly try to answer every single piece of communication that comes my way. And if I don't, it's because I would have missed it, and you're very welcome to reach out again. So I'm sorry, Patching Panda, really sorry that I missed that, because I then ended up buying it myself. But the result is going to be the same, except that I own this one. It wasn't given to me. I own it with my own monies, and that's a positive thing, I think. But why was I saying that? Oh, I was saying that because, yeah, he said that he'd be really grateful if someone could do a video on it because his English isn't that great, which is why the instructions have a little bit of a European flavour to them. And that's okay. You don't have to be a master of English to do this, and that's why people like me exist, to help with all this sort of stuff, to help get to wider markets and a broader customer base. Anyway, let's go back to the beginning. Let's try not to skimp or skip. So, what it wants me to do, first and foremost, is to attach the headers, put it together for soldering. So, rather than solder these great big long strips to the board and then find that they don't match up very well, what you do is you put these on the board first so that you know it's going to be matched up. So we put that on there so it fits. Squish it down. Might take a little bit of effort. Try not to poke yourself. Put the long one on the other side. Like so. Then we're going to take our PCB and make sure it sits on there nicely. Don't want any weird bended legs or anything. It should just go through, which it does. Nice and straight. Attach the female header pins, both PCBs, and solder it. So that's the starting point. The starting point is this rough of solder all the way across here. So we're not messing about. That sits quite well like that. I don't know if I'm going to just sit it up on anything else. I think we can probably just attack it like that without too much bother. And what I'll do, I'm just going to put my magnifying thingies on so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to solder the end here. I'm going to solder this one here too. So I'm going to solder that. I'm just going to do that and speed up the film so you're not sitting around for ages. I'm just doing these little bits and pieces. Then I'll come back and we'll talk about the next bit. See you then. Good, done. Nice and straightforward. To have such a straightforward start to a build. Now we're going to have to ease it apart. Don't want to go too nuts in pulling it apart. Oh, it will do that all by itself. Just got to give it a little bit of persuasion. Cool. Put that bit to one side, and now we've still got all this to play with. So number 3. Place the jacks and sliders. Pink circle showing the 4 jacks, sharing the ground leg in the same hole. Don't solder the mechanics until step 8. Right, so there's a whole lot of placing and no soldering at this point. This is very usually how we do it. So with these patch sockets, what it's suggesting is that the twangy leg here, that goes in the bit in between them. So those two face the middle, those two face the middle, and use the same hole for the twangy bit. These ones along the bottom, they've all got a twangy bit hole on the outside, if you're with me. So this one's going to go in there. And this is going to go in from the other side. Ooh. Maybe this is what they're talking about when they say it's a little bit tricky. So yeah, that hole that those both are sharing is a little bit on the tight side, I have to say. Seems that trying to put them in together might be the better bet. And then just a bit of welly. Oh, those two were much simpler. So with the rest of these, they just go along the outside leg and into there. Now having quite tight holes for these is actually good because it holds them in better, because you tend to find that because you're not soldering these in yet, there's a bit of messing about and other bits and pieces which could involve in them bouncing out all the time. So having a little bit of tension is no bad thing. How am I doing this? Am I hampering myself by doing that outside bit first? Probably. I'm making it more difficult for myself. Some of these are tough little buggers. Oh my goodness. Come on. Come on. Go in there. Good, but we're not soldering them yet. So let's put these fellas on, and they've got 4 pins at one end and 2 pins at the other, and you'll see that on the board. 2 pins at the bottom, 4 pins at the top. Good, good. It's all shaping up nicely. Now this step is crucial, it says. You must look for the plus button to make sure that the pin is also placed by the plus on the PCB. Any mistake in polarity is difficult to correct. So what are we talking about? Talking about these mute switches here, of which there are, well, there's 4 and there must be an extra one. Yeah, okay. So on here somewhere There must be something which is going to tell me. Okay, so there's a plus and a minus underneath. That's minus, that's plus. Okay. See that all right on there? And there's a plus also on the board, so you've got to make sure that those align. So that's the plus. That's going to go like that. This one, that's the plus. That. Now they only seem to have 6 legs, not 7 legs as the PCB may seem to indicate. Those are looking fine. Straighten up the pot and encoder legs and place them. Okay. The legs seem fine as far as I can tell. So the big one goes here, the little one goes there, seems to be the case. It might be referring to these middle lugs. Just going to bring in a little bit. Went in without everything else leaping out, and this goes over here. Again, just bring in those outside lugs a little bit. Okay, better. That felt better. That feels like it's in there. Good. Straighten up the pot and encoder legs, place them in the PCB. Place the last button and insert gently the white cap into it. So the last button is this little yellow one here. And that's going there. Now this does not appear to have a polarity that I can see. I think it's gone crossways, so this in this orientation. It's gone down. Oh, phew! And then there's this little cap here that has to go on top. Now it's square and split any particular way round. It's not really suggesting. It's just going to go on and push down, not too hard. That feels okay. Right. Place a hex nut to the encoder plus 2 washers. Also place 2 washers to the pot. Cut the pin circle to avoid it touching the encoder. So for hex nuts I've got 1 and I've got 3 washers. Now this is trying to get it up to the right height. I'm assuming the same as the patch sockets. While I can see that here the nut and 2 washers lines up quite nicely with the patch sockets, on this side that seems a lot lower. So if I put this on, so as you can see it's definitely not doing anything there, whereas there it is, and it seems a little bit skew whiff. Okay, I got myself slightly confused there. Let's just rewind a second. So we're looking at this pot and encoder. Now what I did, I absolutely assumed that the bigger one, the taller one was the pot and the smaller one was the encoder, because that's completely natural, right? No, not really. Doesn't matter. Who knows? But it's actually the bigger one which is the encoder. The bigger one is the one that just goes all the way around. It has no... it's not an actual analog device. You with me? It's not a pot. This one, the little one, is the pot. So the build guide is actually completely correct, and it's just that I'm making assumptions which I shouldn't make. So what it's saying is that the encoder, which is this bigger one, should have the hex nut. And 2 washers, and this one here should only have 2 washers. Now I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, oh, but they're not level here. They're not level. This is true. And what is actually going to happen is when you put the faceplate on, you're then going to pull this out a little bit so it meets up and is flush. Yes, you are. I've got that directly from the source, as I had to go and ask, and that's the plan. The important thing is that the buttons are able to be free and are able to be pressed. That's what's more important than anything. So let's keep on going. Oh yeah, I've got to snip off this leg because there's a little bit of encroachment here with this pin against the pot. So you just want to... I'm entirely sure how. Crikey. You just want to trim that a little bit so it's not sticking out. Apparently that should be enough. I think it is. Just take the tiniest end off it, or as much end of it as you can, and that should just prevent it from shorting. I think it actually will. Marvellous. Marvellous, marvellous. So, right, that's number 6.6.7. Place a segment display. Now, segment display is here. And this goes at the top. Place a segment display, attach the panel, screw all the nuts, and do not solder yet. Okay, so this can only go one way around because of the number of legs that it has. That just drops beautifully into there. Good. And then you do the tricky thing of placing this over the top. Now what I find for these sorts of operations is that you get a pair of tweezers and you just go around and center all your bits and your buttons, and you'll find that it starts to drop, particularly with patch sockets like so. Oh, I think it's down. I think it's down. Okay, so we've got this kind of slight wobble because of the pot, because of the encoder. So everything is settled. So it says put the nuts on. So you've got these 2 larger ones, which are for this bit and this bit. Nice big shinies. At least I believe so. That's going to help us pull that up, I think. All these others are for the patch sockets. And there's sort of a balance in securing, because you don't want to pull patch sockets out of where they are. At the same time, you want to pull the front panel down to them. Okay, so those are all pretty much there. Don't undo them by accident. That's cool. Okay, those are moving if I'm not careful. All the buttons move. Carefully bring the segment display to the front. Try not to rub it on the panel, and solder that bit first. Right, so I need just to get this encoder up like that. Oh yeah, is there still enough to solder? Yeah, there's enough to solder. Right, so I just pulled that up a little bit, so it's a little bit off the PCB. I can now put this nut on, hopefully, to secure it. Maybe I can't. I don't know. Yeah, no, I mean it's a hard thing to turn, but I think that's done something. So what I need to do is get this display gently to sit out so that it's flush with the hole. Odd. Do I want it coming through the hole? Carefully bring the segment display to the front. Try not to scratch it. So I think what you're going to have to do is just try to get it centered as kind of best you can. yeah, as it just sort of sits there. Right, so then it says what you do is you solder one of the pins, check that it's right, and then do the rest. So just try to get it somewhere in the middle. I was going to solder one leg and see how that looks. Which leg? Which leg? This one. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty straight. It's got a gap at the top, not at the bottom, but I don't think I can do much about that other than angle it. No, that's just how I think that gap at the top. That's more or less how it's supposed to be. That looks fine to me. Then solder it and solder all the rest of the hardware. So things to look out for as you're soldering. You want to make sure these sliders are flat because they have the potential of pulling away from the board as you're soldering. So be careful about that. Make sure those buttons press. So that's good. Everything else just gets soldered. Then you should be good to go. And then it's finished. I mean, this has been a lightning build. Absolutely lightning. Which is brilliant. So I'm going to solder everything inside there. Everything that's sticking out. Try not to melt the headers with your soldering iron. Other than that, just get on with it. I'll see you at the other end. Okay, I mentioned the trickiness of the sliders and them falling forward when you're trying to solder them. So what I've decided to do is set them on something so that they're sitting on the switches and this end here. It seems to be this bottom end that falls away because the top end has got a lot more pins on it and they're holding in better. So I'm going to lay it down on something which sticks up so it's not resting on these knobs. And that should push all of these pins through here fully. I definitely think it's worth paying a little bit of attention to that. Otherwise your sliders are all going to be screwy. that looks all pretty good to me. Everything is still moving. Everything is still buttoning, turning, and encoding, patching, hopefully. Good. So attach the PCBs, place the knobs and the power module, and then boot her up. All right, there we go. So these go together like this. Make sure they're nicely aligned. Both sides. I wonder what that connects to. Don't know. Okay. Push them together. And voila! That's your module. Wow. So these here nuts then must be for the rack, not for this in particular. No, that's right. Got two knobs here. One with nothing on it, which is going to be for the encoder on this side. I think it just pushes on. Yeah. Oh, and it has a one of those as well. And this one I'm going to wind over to the left. Oh, some kind of dice. 1, 2. Ooh. Curiouser and curiouser. Over to the left. Put the pointer about on the square. Push that down. And that then goes nicely. Well, it's a decent looking thing, I have to say. Everything seems to be right. 4 screws, which I can use for something. And then the last bit is the power cable, which fits on the back. It's got a shroud, so there's no danger of putting it in the wrong way around. And in fact, it doesn't have minus 12 volts marked on it, so you're just going to have to go with it. It goes in like that. Good, grand, there we go. That is the Patching Panda particles put together by yours truly. Now we've got to test it out, of course, which is a whole other thing, but let's plug it into something and see what happens. Right, plug it into my case here. If I can find the room. Should fit perfectly with a little bit of luck. Like so. So, we're just going to turn it on first, and we're going to check to see that there's no smoke, no badness happens. So I'm going to just put it in quite loosely, turn it on. Okay, we have lights and numbers, look at that, lights and numbers. Any smoke? No smoke. Right, this is one of those occasions where I'm just looking at it going, I absolutely have no idea what this thing is supposed to do. How odd. But let's screw it in, because I'm suddenly thinking it's going to generate stuff, and then I'm noticing it's got all these trigger inputs. So if I'm needing to trigger it, is it just changing things that I put in, therefore it's a pattern manipulator rather than a pattern generator? But I guess what it probably needs before anything else is a clock. So let's give it a clock. Okay. Bypass. Rate. Probability. So those are mutes. If I hold function, gator, bypass, probability, absorb, and we're back onto that again. Interesting. Right, so no idea what's going on. Of course, obviously at this point I probably need to have a bit of a look at the manual. So particles is 4 channels of trigger modulation, capable of mathematically varying and manipulating your patterns with a combination of fun features to play with. Can evolve your rhythmic idea into more complex groovy patterns which are difficult to achieve without musical knowledge. So that's interesting. So I'm going to need to be feeding it things in the first place. You can create your algorithms from the rhythmic tools provided to be able to change the patterns instantaneously in many ways without worrying to sacrifice the original idea. Okay. You can shift and scramble the outputs. You can repeat triggers with different time signatures and transform the grooves. Mute in different ways. Disappear by probability trigger inputs. Disappear by probability repetitions. Use sequential switching to shift randomly with a different kind of resetting. The idea of particles: provide features for building complex breaks and grooves. So we need external triggers into 1, 2, 3 and 4. So that's what we're going to need to work out. So I need to, this is not something which is going to replace my microgrids, which I sort of had in my head that it would be. It's actually something that's going to interpret patterns. So what I could do is I could give it a number of clocks from a clock divider, and then something very, very steady, and then use it to change that. I think that's probably going to be the way forward. patching Panda particles then. Curious, really curious. It's different to what I thought. No less interesting, very, very fascinating. I kind of like the fact that I can take some very standard triggers from my clock divider, for instance, and have that reworked into a pattern and into a groove. Now, there's a lot going on in here which I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of yet, but it's starting to reveal itself as I play with it. Now, there's a manual which I will go through and have a good deep dive and thought about, and I'll do a proper video on reviewing what it is that it can actually do, what its functions are, what it could give you in your rack. As far as the build's concerned, it was relatively easy. I mean, it's only the front panel hardware that you're having to put on. You're not having to mess about with resistors, capacitors, and all those other bits and pieces, and all the stress there is involved in identifying components and putting those on. The only struggle was just to get that front panel aligned, to get that in, to get the LED display properly aligned. It's tricky in that respect. It's tricky in putting it together, a little bit fiddly rather than difficult. I wouldn't say it was complex as is suggested in the manual. It's not a difficult build, it's just a little bit of fiddly faffling about to get those sorts of bits right. But you could build it in, half an hour, something like that, without too much trouble, and then you're playing with it. As far as I know, it seems to be working right, but then I don't really know what it's supposed to be doing. But getting these triggers in here and getting these outputs out is really interesting, and I want to go a lot deeper into what it is actually doing, where it's pulling what from what, and what is making it do the thing that it's doing. There seems to be something to do with the number that's shifting the inputs between what it is that perhaps is the master or starting everything off. There's definitely a probability aspect going on. Absorb, I still haven't quite got the hang of that. A perfect companion for something like PAMs, I should think, because you can just take some regular output or even a Euclidean pattern and route it through there in order to create variations and differences. Which is interesting, because that's what we like, variation and differences. So, yeah, I mean, I think I made an initial misdiagnosis. I think I saw it, and when I wrote it up, I absolutely assumed that it would be generating patterns. It would be a pattern generator. I thought it would replace my microgrids, or at least potentially, because that is still a fiddle and a faffle, although awesome at the same time, looking for something which could complement it or change it or do something else. And I thought the particles would be the ideal thing for that. And I think it could still be, because you could use the two together running microgrids through it, and this gives you a more interesting approach to changing the patterns that are coming out of it. It's interesting, isn't it? It's amazing what assumptions you make about a module as you're trying to read about it, and then when you have it in your hands, it's actually quite different. And that's what I'm finding with this. So on one level, I'm slightly disappointed that it's not the pattern generator that I thought it was, but on another, my mind's now starting to crawl through the possibilities of what it can do to simple clocks. And it means I could take other things out and use it as a little groove station. I could use it for triggering envelopes, for differing out sequences, just by using some standard clocks going in and messing about with what that can achieve. Because it can do bursting, it can do changes in tempo, it can do different rhythms and bits and pieces. So while it may not necessarily be fulfilling my initial requirements, it is bringing something of its own. That's interesting. So I'm going to spend some time with it, see if I can work out exactly what it's doing, get through the manual, that kind of thing, while I'm working up my review on the wobbler, which I've got here, and see what I can make of it. So stay tuned. I'll have a video on it coming soon, I should think. In the meantime, I hope that was helpful. Go make some tunes.